Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back in time, not to the battlefields or the high seas, but deep into the very heart of a Viking home. Imagine, if you will, the biting Nordic winds howling outside, the kind that make your bones ache just thinking about it. You trudge through snow, your breath pluming like a tiny, distressed cloud, seeking refuge from the relentless chill. You push open a heavy timber door, and what do you expect to find inside? A stark, smoky cave? A rough, unadorned shelter where only the hardiest of souls could possibly survive? Well, you probably won't survive that perception of Viking life, because tonight we're peeling back the layers of misconception. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening from somewhere particularly cozy, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've probably seen the movies, right? Bearded warriors, horned helmets, which, by the way, they rarely, if ever, wore into battle, a fun little historical inaccuracy for you, and long ships cutting through icy waves. You picture a Viking home as something equally rugged, perhaps a bit unrefined. A place where practicality trumped comfort, where the focus was on survival, not on interior design. You imagine rough-hewn timbers, a central fire pit belching smoke, and maybe a few sheepskins thrown haphazardly over a bench. And let's be honest, you'd probably expect it to smell like a damp dog with a serious body odor problem, wouldn't you? Because Vikings. Brutality. Cold. Simple, right? But what if I told you that this widely accepted image, while containing elements of truth about their sturdy construction and the harsh environment, misses a crucial, almost delightful detail? What if I told you that the Viking longhouse, far from being a Spartan, chilly dwelling, was often a surprisingly warm, inviting, and even decorated haven? It's a stark contrast to the axe-wielding, dragon-headed longship image, isn't it? It's like discovering your gruff, motorcycle gang uncle secretly knits intricate lace doilies. You just didn't see it coming. Tonight, we're going to challenge that cold, barren stereotype and reveal a hidden world of Viking domesticity, a world where the primary architects of comfort were not the carpenters or the stonemasons, but the skilled hands that spun and wove. We're talking about textiles, my friends. Yes, the very fabric of their lives, literally and figuratively, was woven with an unexpected dedication to coziness. Forget your minimalist Scandinavian design trends for a moment. The original Scandinavians were actually quite maximalist when it came to soft furnishings. They practically invented the hygge movement, centuries before it became a trendy hashtag. Imagine stepping into one of these longhouses on a frigid winter's night. The first thing that strikes you isn't the biting cold, but a palpable sense of warmth. Not the dry, sterile heat of modern central heating, but a deep, earthy warmth radiating from the central hearth, yes, but also from every surface around you. The air, while perhaps carrying a faint whiff of wood smoke and, let's be honest, unwashed human, because showers weren't exactly on the agenda back then, and deodorant was, shall we say, a future invention, is softened, less harsh than the outside world. The light, flickering from the fire and perhaps a few oil lamps, dances across surfaces that aren't just rough wood, but rich, textured fabrics. You see it in your mind's eye, don't you? The long, low roof, often insulated with layers of turf and timber, already doing its best to keep the elements at bay. But inside, that's where the magic truly happens. The walls, which you might expect to be bare and drafty, are instead draped with layers of woven hangings. These aren't just decorative, they're practical insulation, trapping precious heat within the dwelling. It's like wrapping your entire home in a giant, beautifully patterned blanket. And let's face it, who doesn't love a good blanket fort? The Vikings just made theirs permanent. This wasn't just about survival, though survival was undoubtedly a key driver in the unforgiving Nordic climate. It was also about creating a sense of home, a sanctuary from the relentless external world. Think about it. When you spend your days battling elements or enemies, or just the sheer boredom of a long winter, your home becomes everything. It becomes your refuge, your stronghold, and your comfort zone. And the Vikings, despite their fearsome reputation, were incredibly adept at making their homes exactly that. One mainstream historical fact that supports this is the very construction of the longhouse itself. These structures, typically long and narrow, often featured double-layered walls, sometimes packed with earth or turf, and thick, insulating roof. This inherent structural warmth was then amplified by the extensive use of textiles. So, the basic architectural design already leaned towards coziness, and the textiles were the luxurious upgrade. It's like buying a well-insulated thermos and then adding a custom-knitted cozy to it. Overkill, perhaps, but gloriously effective. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. While we often associate Vikings with their raids and voyages, the majority of their lives were spent in these very homes, engaging in farming, crafting, and, yes, domestic chores. In fact, archaeological evidence from sites like Firket in Denmark or the famous Oseberg ship burial in Norway reveals not just weapons and tools, but an astonishing array of everyday textile items, fragments of bedding, clothing, and decorative hangings. It suggests a domestic life far richer and more nuanced than the brutal barbarian stereotype allows. It's like finding out Conan the Barbarian had a penchant for collecting artisanal throw pillows. You just know he'd deny it vehemently. Now, you might be thinking, but how much of this was truly about coziness versus pure necessity? And that, my friends, brings us to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for such extensive textile use was pure survival and insulation, or if there was a deeper, inherent desire for aesthetic beauty and domestic comfort from the outset. Were these textiles merely functional, keeping the cold out and the warmth in, or did they also serve as vital expressions of identity, status, and an appreciation for the beautiful? The truth is likely a blend of both, a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of a people who understood that a truly resilient spirit needed a warm and inviting place to rest. So, as you settle deeper into your own comfortable bed, imagine the Viking family, bundled in their woolen blankets, perhaps gathered around the flickering hearth, the woven walls around them muffling the sounds of the stormy night. Their homes weren't just shelters, they were textile-rich sanctuaries, crafted with care and an eye for comfort that might just surprise you. And that, my friends, is just the very beginning of our journey into the surprisingly cozy world of Viking domesticity. Section 2. You stand before it now, a low, elongated shadow against the twilight sky. This isn't the grand stone castle of your storybooks, nor the bustling timbered city you might envision. No, this is something far more ancient, far more elemental, a Viking longhouse. And as you approach, a faint, earthy scent, mingled with wood smoke, begins to fill the crisp air, a prelude to the warmth you're about to discover within. Imagine for a moment, if you will, that you're not just an observer, but a Viking coming home after a long day. Perhaps you've been out tending the fields, or maybe you've just returned from a bracing journey on the fjord, the salt spray still clinging to your wool tunic. You trudge towards the low-slung entrance, a heavy timber door, often set slightly off-center, almost like the architects were playing a subtle game of find the hidden opening. There's no doorbell here, no welcoming porch light, just the quiet promise of shelter. As you push open the heavy door, probably a single plank of thick, sturdy wood, you step from the biting Nordic chill into a world that immediately shifts your perception of Viking life. The first thing that greets you isn't a blast of heat, but a comforting, slightly smoky warmth, thick with the scent of burning peat and dried herbs. Your eyes, accustomed to the fading daylight, slowly adjust to the dim, flickering glow emanating from the very heart of the structure. This is the longhouse, your cozy foundation, and it's a master class in pragmatic, sustainable architecture for its time. Think of it as the ultimate open-plan living, Viking edition, but without the exposed brick or the minimalist aesthetic. Instead, you get exposed timber, turf, and a whole lot of earthy charm. The typical longhouse was, as its name suggests, long, often stretching anywhere from 50 to over 200 feet in length, though usually more modestly sized for a single family. It was also surprisingly narrow, creating an almost tunnel-like effect that helped to trap heat. The primary building materials were those readily available in the Nordic landscape: sturdy timber for the internal framework, providing the skeletal strength, and then thick walls constructed from turf, stone, or wattle and daub, all designed for maximum insulation. Imagine laying down layers of thick sod, grass side out, creating walls that were literally alive, merging with the very earth they stood upon. It's like living inside a giant, very well-insulated hobbit hole, just a bit more rectangular. These thick walls were crucial, not just for keeping out the cold, but also for dampening the incessant Nordic wind. You wouldn't find any drafty windows here. In fact, windows were a rarity, often just small, high slits or simple openings that could be quickly covered. This design choice, while sacrificing natural light, was a deliberate and vital strategy for heat retention. No sense letting all that precious warmth escape, right? It's like your grandma telling you to close the door because you're heating the whole neighborhood. The Vikings just took that advice to an extreme. Now let your gaze drift upwards. The roof, often steeply pitched, would have been thatched with straw, reeds, or more layers of turf, supported by massive timber beams. And running almost the entire length of the building, directly above you, you'd notice a long, narrow opening, a smoke vent. This wasn't some fancy chimney. It was a simple, ingenious, or perhaps, depending on your tolerance for smoke, less ingenious solution to vent the smoke from the central hearth. This brings us to the absolute heart of the longhouse, both literally and figuratively, the central fire pit. Usually, there would be one, or perhaps two, long hearths running down the middle of the floor, extending for many feet. This wasn't just for cooking, it was the sole source of heat and light for the entire dwelling. Picture the dancing flames, casting their warm, orange glow across the rough-hewn timber and earthen walls, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. The crackle of the burning wood, the occasional hiss of a damp log, would have been the constant soundtrack to Viking domestic life. And yes, the smoke did fill the upper reaches of the longhouse before finding its way out through the roof vent. Some historians even suggest that the smoke, while perhaps a bit irritating to the eyes and lungs, also served a beneficial purpose, helping to preserve the timber structure from rot and deterring insects. So, in a way, your cozy home was getting a constant, all-natural fumigation treatment. Forget your fancy air purifiers. The Vikings had good old-fashioned wood smoke. As you step further in, you realize the floor beneath your feet is typically compacted earth, sometimes overlaid with gravel or sand. It's solid, practical, and undeniably cold. This is where the longhouse's fundamental design truly sets the stage for the textile revolution we're about to explore. An earthen floor, while durable, is not exactly inviting for lounging. This immediate discomfort highlights the necessity of something soft, something warm, something textile to transform this basic foundation into a truly livable space. Flanking the central hearth, running along the length of the longhouse on either side, you'd find raised platforms or benches. These were the primary sleeping and seating areas for the household. Imagine them as wide, low platforms, perhaps a foot or two off the ground, often with a low partition or wall separating them from the central aisle. These platforms were more than just beds, they were the multifunctional furniture of the Viking Age. During the day, they served as seating for meals, for crafting, for simply gathering and talking. At night, they became beds, accommodating multiple family members in close proximity. The sheer practicality of these platforms, however, also underscores their inherent lack of comfort. A bare wooden plank is not exactly a cloudsoft mattress, is it? Again, the design of the longhouse, with its simple, functional furnishings, demanded the addition of textiles to make these spaces truly habitable and comfortable. Beyond the main living area, some longhouses, particularly in colder regions or for wealthier families, might have incorporated stalls for livestock at one end, separated by a partition. This ingenious design meant that the body heat from the animals contributed to the overall warmth of the dwelling. Imagine your roommate literally being a cow, which, let's be honest, is probably better than some human roommates you've had. Historians still argue whether this practice was universal or more common in certain areas or for specific social classes, but the principle was sound. Shared warmth, shared space, shared aromas. The communal nature of the longhouse is also key. There were no separate rooms as you know them, no private bedrooms with doors you could lock. Life was lived in shared space. This communal arrangement, while fostering strong family bonds, also presented challenges for privacy and personal space. This is another area where the longhouse's basic design, or lack of internal divisions, created a perfect canvas for textile solutions. How do you create a sense of personal space when everyone is effectively in one giant room? Textiles, dear listener, textiles. Think about the atmosphere. The dimness, the constant low light from the fire, the way sounds would echo and dissipate within the long, open space. The lack of natural light meant that any color, any pattern, any visual interest would have to come from within. The inherent simplicity of the longhouse's construction, its rough timber, its earthen walls, its basic wooden benches, created a blank canvas, almost begging for decoration and warmth. It was a functional, robust shell, designed to protect its inhabitants from the harsh elements, but it was far from inherently cozy. And this, my friend, is where the magic begins. The longhouse, in its very bones, in its fundamental design, was a testament to practicality and survival. It was built to keep out the cold, to shelter families and sometimes their animals, to provide a central hearth for sustenance. But it was also a structure that, by its very nature, cried out for softness, for color, for insulation, for division, for comfort. It was a stage perfectly set for the introduction of textiles, not as mere embellishments, but as indispensable components that transformed a functional shelter into a warm, inviting, and surprisingly sophisticated home. The longhouse laid the groundwork. Now we're ready to see how Vikings built their comfort upon it, stitch by careful stitch. Section 3. Now, imagine you're standing in the chilly air of a Nordic farmstead, the wind whipping around you. You've got the longhouse foundation set, the walls are up, and you're already feeling a tiny bit warmer just thinking about it. But what made those walls, those beds, those very surfaces inside feel so much more inviting than the raw timber and earth? Ah, my friend, that's where the magic begins, with the very fibers that were pulled from the land itself, transformed by diligent hands into the threads of Viking domesticity. Before a single yarn could be spun, before a single loom could clack, the raw materials had to be coaxed, harvested, and prepared. It's a journey from field and pasture to hearth and home, and it's far more intricate than just grabbing a ball of yarn from your local craft store. Let's start with the undisputed heavyweight champion of Viking textiles, wool. You might picture a sheep, woolly and docile, but the sheep of the Viking age weren't quite the fluffy, domesticated lawnmowers we see today. We're talking about hardy, resilient breeds, often descendants of the northern European short-tailed sheep, similar to the modern Icelandic or Gotland sheep. These weren't your pampered merino sheep, bred for superfine, itch-free sweaters. Oh no. These were tough little creatures, perfectly adapted to the harsh Nordic climate, and their wool reflected that resilience. You'd find a fascinating duality in their fleece. A coarse, shaggy outer coat, often called the hair layer, which was incredibly durable and water-repellent, shedding rain and snow with ease. It was the original Gore-Tex, just, organic and a little more sheep-smelling. Beneath that, nestled close to the skin, was a finer, softer undercoat, which provided the actual insulation. It's like nature's built-in layering system, and it was absolutely essential for survival in a world without central heating or even decent draft excluders. Obtaining this precious wool wasn't always a simple matter of shearing, either. While shears existed, they weren't universally available or as efficient as modern ones. For many of these ancient breeds, particularly the short-tailed varieties, a significant portion of their fleece would naturally shed or pluck in the spring. Imagine, if you will, the Viking farmer gently plucking handfuls of wool from their sheep, almost like a giant, very patient, and slightly bewildered human lint roller. It sounds like a spa treatment for the sheep, doesn't it? Oh yes, just a little more off the shoulder, please, I'm feeling a bit warm. This plucking method yielded a mix of lengths and textures, which then needed to be sorted and cleaned. The lanolin, that natural waxy substance in wool, would have been present in abundance, giving the raw fleece a distinct, earthy, almost oily scent. It's the smell of warmth, of protection, of a very busy sheep. And it certainly wasn't the kind of smell you'd find in your laundry detergent aisle today, unless your laundry detergent was specifically designed to smell like authentic Viking sheep. This raw wool, once harvested, was a miracle fiber. It's naturally crimped, meaning it has a springy, wavy structure that traps air, making it an excellent insulator. It's also incredibly durable and resistant to wear and tear, a quality that was absolutely non-negotiable when your blankets and clothes had to last for years, through hard work and harsh conditions. And the colors! Before the advent of widespread dyeing, Viking wool would have come in a beautiful palette of natural hues. Creamy whites, various shades of gray from light silver to charcoal, earthy browns, and even some blacks. These natural variations would have been woven together, creating subtle, organic patterns that speak to the understated beauty of a world before synthetic colors. You might think, oh, how boring, just natural colors. But imagine the rich texture, the way the light catches the different fibers, the inherent warmth emanating from something so directly connected to the animal it came from. It's like the original minimalist aesthetic, but with a lot more sheep. Now, let's turn our attention to the unsung hero of Viking textiles, flax. While wool provided the bulk and the warmth, flax offered a different kind of comfort and utility. You see, flax is a plant, a tall, slender stalk that produces the fibers we know as linen. Cultivating flax was a completely different endeavor from raising sheep, demanding a different kind of agricultural knowledge and a whole lot of elbow grease. You'd plant the seeds in spring, watch the delicate blue flowers bloom in summer, and then, crucially, harvest the stalks in late summer before they fully ripened. This wasn't a job for the faint of heart or the easily bored. The process of turning flax stalks into usable fiber was, to put it mildly, an olfactory adventure. After harvesting, the stalks were subjected to retting. This involved soaking them in water, often a slow-moving stream, a pond, or even just dew on the ground, for several weeks. The goal? To allow bacteria to break down the pectin that binds the fibers to the woody core of the plant. And let me tell you, that bacterial action creates a smell. A pungent, earthy, slightly sulfuric smell that would make a modern city dweller wrinkle their nose and probably call the hazmat team. It's the smell of decomposition, of transformation, of a truly committed textile artist. Imagine trying to explain that aroma to your friends. Oh, that's just the smell of my new bedsheets, they're authentically Viking ret. You probably wouldn't get many sleepover invitations. Once the retting was complete, and the stalks were sufficiently stinky and softened, they were dried and then subjected to a process called scutching. This involved beating the stalks to break away the woody outer layers, leaving behind the long, desirable fibers. Think of it as a very aggressive massage for plants. After scutching, the fibers were hackled, pulled through combs with increasingly finer teeth to separate the long, straight linen fibers from the shorter, coarser tow. This was meticulous work, requiring patience and a keen eye, as each step brought the raw plant material closer to the smooth, strong threads that would become their everyday fabrics. Flax fibers, once prepared, were a revelation. Unlike wool, linen is smooth and cool to the touch, making it ideal for garments worn closer to the skin or for items where durability and a crisp feel were desired. It's incredibly strong, much stronger than wool, which made it excellent for things like sails, a critical component of Viking life, but also for sturdy clothing, bags, and yes, even some bedding. It doesn't insulate as well as wool, but it's highly breathable, making it comfortable in warmer conditions or as a base layer. Historians still argue whether flax cultivation was as widespread across all Viking territories, given regional climates and soil differences, but its presence in archaeological finds confirms its importance. It's a testament to their ingenuity that they mastered both the cozy warmth of wool and the crisp strength of linen. While wool and flax were the undeniable stars of the Viking textile show, there were other supporting acts. Nettles, for instance, could also be processed to yield a strong, linen-like fiber, though it was more labor-intensive and less common. It's a bit like trying to make a gourmet meal out of weeds, possible, but not always practical. Animal hides and furs, while not fibers in the traditional sense, were also crucial for warmth and floor coverings, providing an additional layer of insulation and comfort. You might imagine a bearskin rug, but it was more likely sheepskins or reindeer hides, draped over benches or laid on the floor. These weren't just decorative, they were absolutely vital for survival. So, when you picture the raw materials of a Viking home, don't just think of logs and stones. Think of the living, breathing fibers. The sheep, patiently enduring their spring plucking or shearing, offering up their warm, lanolin-rich fleece. Think of the flax fields, swaying gently in the breeze, soon to embark on their smelly transformation in the Redding Pond. These weren't just commodities. They were integral parts of the ecosystem, harvested with respect and transformed with incredible skill. They are the very first threads in the story of how Viking homes became surprisingly cozy, proving that even in the toughest environments, comfort finds a way. Section 4. You've explored the raw materials, the hardy wool from those surprisingly resilient sheep, the versatile flax that grew so well in the northern lands. You've imagined them gathered, cleaned, and perhaps even dyed with the earth's vibrant pigments. But now we move from the raw potential to the crafted reality, a transformation that turns humble fibers into the very essence of Viking comfort. This is where the true alchemy happened, where warmth was quite literally spun and woven into existence, thread by painstaking thread. Imagine, if you will, a longhouse interior, perhaps a bit smoky from the central hearth, but otherwise filled with the quiet hum of domestic industry. Your hands, if you were a Viking woman and often men too, for certain tasks, would be intimately familiar with the feel of unspun fiber. For wool, it's a soft, slightly oily cloud, sometimes tangled, sometimes holding bits of straw or burrs. For flax, once wet and processed, it's a stiffer, more lustrous bundle, ready to be softened and separated. Before you can even think about weaving, you need yarn. And yarn, my friend, does not simply appear. The first step in this fascinating journey is spinning. It's a process so ancient, so fundamental, that it almost feels like a primal act of creation. You begin by preparing the fibers. For wool, this often involved carding, taking two paddle-like boards with rows of wire teeth and gently combing the wool between them, aligning the fibers, removing impurities, and creating a fluffy, airy mass called a rolag or a sliver. Think of it like brushing a very shaggy dog, but with a purpose beyond just de-shedding. For flax, the preparation was more intensive, involving multiple stages of retting, rotting the outer stalk to free the fibers, scutching, beating and scraping to remove woody bits, and hackling, combing with progressively finer combs to separate and straighten the long, strong bast fibers. It's all about getting those individual strands ready to be twisted into something cohesive. Now, picture yourself with a prepared bundle of fibers, perhaps tucked under your arm or draped over a distaff, a stick that holds the unspun fiber. In your hand, you hold the simplest yet most ingenious tool for spinning, the drop spindle. It's essentially a stick, often made of wood, with a weighted disc called a spindle whorl near the bottom. The whorl, which could be made of stone, clay, bone, or even wood, provides the momentum. You attach a few fibers from your prepared bundle to the top of the spindle, give it a gentle flick to set it spinning, and then, with practiced fingers, you begin to draft the fibers. Drafting is the art of gently pulling and attenuating the fibers, drawing them out to a consistent thickness, while the rotating spindle below twists them together. It's a delicate dance between your fingers, controlling the fiber supply and the downward pull of gravity on the spinning spindle, which adds the necessary twist. You can almost hear it, can't you? The soft, almost imperceptible whir of the spindle as it descends, the gentle whisper of fibers being drawn out, the quiet thunk as it occasionally hits the floor, signaling it's time to wind the newly spun yarn onto the shaft. It's a truly meditative sound, a constant backdrop to daily life in a Viking home. It's like a very early form of fidget spinner, if your fidget spinner actually produced something incredibly useful and kept you warm in the winter. This wasn't a quick task. To produce enough yarn for even a modest blanket, you would need to spin for hundreds of hours. It was a constant, ongoing process, often done while walking, tending to children, or even chatting with neighbors. The very consistency of the yarn, its thickness, its twist, would determine the quality and durability of the final textile. You can imagine the satisfaction as a bobbin of perfectly spun yarn grew thicker and thicker, a tangible representation of hours of patient work. And here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have unearthed spindle whorls of remarkably varied sizes. Some are incredibly tiny, suggesting the creation of incredibly fine, delicate threads, perhaps for intricate embroidery or very lightweight, luxurious garments. Others are quite large and heavy, indicating a need for thick, sturdy yarn, ideal for durable blankets, heavy cloaks, or even the massive, wind-resistant sails that propelled their longships across the waves. This diversity tells us much about the varied textile needs of the Viking Age. Once you had mountains, and I do mean mountains, of spun yarn, the next grand step was weaving. This is where individual threads are transformed into a cohesive, warm, and often beautiful fabric. The dominant loom in the Viking Age was the warp-weighted loom, a truly ingenious piece of technology that was widespread across northern Europe. Imagine a sturdy wooden frame, often leaning against a wall, with a horizontal beam at the top from which hundreds, sometimes thousands, of long threads, called the warp threads, hang vertically. At the bottom of each group of warp threads, heavy loom weights, often made of clay or stone, sometimes carved with simple designs, are attached, pulling the threads taut and creating the necessary tension. Setting up this loom, or warping it, was arguably the most meticulous and time-consuming part of the entire weaving process. You had to measure out each warp thread to exactly the right length, ensuring uniform tension across the entire width of the loom. One misplaced thread, one uneven tension, and your entire fabric could end up skewed or loose. It's enough to make you want to just wear a sheepskin, isn't it? This step alone could take days, or even weeks, depending on the size of the textile you intended to weave. It was a task requiring incredible patience, precision, and often, the help of another person to manage the sheer volume of threads. But once the warp was set, the rhythmic dance of weaving could begin. The loom itself had a clever system of heddles, loops or rods that separated alternating sets of warp thread. By manipulating these heddles, you could create an opening or shed between the warp threads. Through this shed, you would pass the weft thread, wound onto a shuttle. Once the weft was passed through, you would then change the shed, closing the previous opening and creating a new one. Then came the satisfying thwack of the weaving sword or beater. This flat, sturdy tool was used to beat down the newly inserted weft thread, compacting it tightly against the previous rows, creating a dense, strong, and warm fabric. The sound of a warp-weighted loom in action would have been a constant, comforting presence in a Viking home, the soft clack of the heddles shifting, the gentle swish of the shuttle passing through the shed, and then the firm, rhythmic thwack of the beater. It was a symphony of productivity, a testament to the ongoing creation of comfort. For large textiles, like those impressive wall hangings or the sails for their ships, multiple people might work side by side on the same loom, their movements coordinated, a true communal effort in textile creation. While plain weave, a simple over-under pattern, was common, Vikings were also adept at more complex structures, notably twill weave. In a twill weave, the weft thread passes over two or more warp threads and then under one or more, creating a distinctive diagonal line in the fabric. This technique produces a more durable, often softer, and more flexible fabric perfect for clothing that needed to withstand the elements, or blankets that needed to be both warm and pliable. The sophistication of some of these twill weaves, found in archaeological excavations, is truly remarkable. In fact, historians still argue whether the complexity of some surviving textile fragments suggests professional weavers existed, perhaps even specialized workshops, or if all high-quality weaving was purely a domestic skill passed down through generations within the family unit. Imagine the satisfaction as the fabric slowly grew, inch by painstaking inch, emerging from the chaos of individual threads into a coherent, tactile surface. A blanket for the bed, a tunic for wear, a grand wall hanging to insulate and adorn. This wasn't just craft. It was a fundamental act of survival and an expression of domesticity. They didn't have central heating, but they certainly had central weaving, a constant, productive hum that transformed raw materials into the very fabric of their cozy life. Each spun thread, each beaten weft, contributed directly to the warmth, the comfort, and the surprising softness of a Viking home. It was a tangible manifestation of ingenuity, perseverance, and the deep human need to create a sanctuary against the wild world outside. Word count: 1,368. Awaiting, continue. Section 5. You've journeyed with us through the very fibers and the intricate weaving that gave life to Viking textiles. Now, imagine yourself standing inside that longhouse again, but this time, the sun is setting, casting long, flickering shadows from the central hearth. The chill of the Nordic evening begins to seep in, a subtle reminder that outside, the world is preparing for a long, unforgiving night. This is where the true genius of Viking textile use comes into its own, transforming a drafty, earthen-floored structure into a surprisingly vital and deeply comforting sanctuary. We're talking about essential comfort, your bedding and your blankets. Think about your own bed right now. Your plush mattress, perhaps a memory foam topper, crisp cotton sheets, a fluffy duvet. Now, gently let that image dissipate. We're stepping back in time, not to a world of deprivation, but to one where comfort was reimagined through ingenuity and the tireless work of human hands. Your Viking bed won't have springs, but it will have layers, and those layers are everything. As dusk deepens, you'd find yourself drawn towards the raised platforms or benches that typically lined the long walls of the house. These weren't just for sitting during the day. They were the foundation of your nocturnal haven. Picture a wide, sturdy wooden bench, perhaps a foot or two off the ground. This elevation wasn't just for prestige. It was a crucial barrier against the cold, damp earth floor, creating a pocket of slightly warmer air. It's like the original platform bed, only instead of a minimalist aesthetic, it's all about maximum utility. So, you've got your sturdy wooden base. What comes next? Well, you wouldn't just flop down on a hard plank, would you? The first layer of true comfort often came from nature itself: straw, dried hay, or even soft, insulating moss. This was your mattress filling, your primitive spring system. It provided a remarkable degree of cushioning, absorbing the lumps and bumps of the wooden base. Imagine the rustle as you settle in, the earthy scent of dried grasses filling your nostrils. It's a sensory experience far removed from your hypoallergenic pillow. Now, a little secret about straw bedding. It was cozy, yes, but also a magnet for, let's just say, uninvited guests. Small, six-legged creatures found it quite appealing. So, every now and then, the entire contents of the mattress would have to be dragged outside, shaken out, and replenished. It was an ancient form of pest control, or perhaps, as one Viking might have sarcastically quipped, just adding a bit of protein to your bedtime snack. On top of this rustic mattress, you'd find another layer, a woven mat or a coarser textile, designed to keep the scratchy straw from poking through and to offer a smoother surface. Think of it as your fitted sheet, but made of sturdy, undyed wool or linen, designed for durability rather than thread count. This was the barrier between you and your, potentially buggy, mattress. Now, for the serious warmth. The real heroes of Viking bedtime were the animal hides and the incredibly thick woolen blanket. Animal hides were not just for show, they were essential. You might find a bear skin, a wolf pelt, or more commonly, sheepskins and reindeer hide. These were laid fur side up, providing an immediate, intense blast of natural warmth. The dense fur trapped air, creating an insulating layer that few modern materials can truly replicate. It's like sleeping in your very own personal, organic sleeping bag, only infinitely more luxurious and, dare we say, a bit more primal. Imagine running your hand over the thick, soft fur, feeling the immediate warmth radiating back. It's the kind of warmth that settles deep into your bones, warding off the most aggressive Nordic chill. And yes, they probably smelled a bit wild. Lanolin and a hint of wood smoke. The original Viking perfume, perhaps? But the true unsung champions of Viking slumber were those thick woolen blankets. These weren't your flimsy throws. These were substantial, heavy, and often felted, meaning the fibers were matted together to create an even denser, more insulating fabric. They were masterpieces of textile engineering, designed to trap body heat like a pro. Wool, as you know, is a wonder fiber. It's naturally breathable, wicks away moisture, and most importantly for a longhouse environment, it retains its insulating properties even when damp. So, even if the air was a bit humid or a rogue draft snuck in, your wool blanket was still working hard to keep you toasty. You'd pull these heavy blankets up over you, layer upon layer, the weight a comforting pressure, enveloping you in a cocoon of warmth. It was a warmth that felt earned, a testament to the countless hours of spinning and weaving that went into its creation. Historians still debate the precise arrangement of sleeping spaces within the longhouse, particularly whether designated family bedrooms existed or if it was truly an open communal space for sleeping, with privacy created by textile screens. But regardless of the exact layout, the principle remained. Layers of natural materials, expertly crafted, were the key to surviving the cold night. And what about pillows? Your head wouldn't just rest on the hard bench. Simple pillows, often stuffed with softer wool scraps, feathers, if available, or even dried leaves and moss, would have provided a much-needed elevation and cushion for your head. Or perhaps you'd simply roll up one of your extra blankets to create a makeshift headrest. Comfort was practical, not ostentatious. The sheer volume of bedding required for a longhouse full of people was immense. Think of a large family today buying duvets for everyone. Now imagine them making every single fiber, every stitch, from scratch. It was a continuous, year-round effort. The women of the household, as we'll discuss later, were the primary architects of this comfort. They knew that a well-insulated bed wasn't just about luxury. It was about health, energy, and survival. A good night's sleep meant a productive day ahead, ready to face the rigors of Viking life. Imagine waking up on a crisp, frosty morning inside that longhouse. The fire in the hearth might have dwindled to embers, and a thin layer of hoarfrost might even cling to the inside of the roof timbers. But you, nestled deep within your layers of wool and fur, would be surprisingly warm. The thought of emerging from that cozy cocoon, perhaps to face the biting wind and the day's chores, might have been the original 5 more minutes struggle. You'd pull the blankets just a little tighter, savoring the last moments of deep, enveloping warmth, before the calls of the day and the promise of a hot breakfast finally lured you out. This wasn't just about enduring the cold, it was about creating a space of genuine repose. The essential comfort of Viking bedding and blankets transformed the raw, elemental challenge of the Nordic climate into an opportunity for profound, tactile coziness. It reminds you that even in a world without central heating or memory foam, humanity has always found ingenious ways to make life not just bearable, but truly comfortable. Section 6. As you slowly peel yourself from the comforting layers of wool and furs that made your bed a surprisingly snug haven, your eyes begin to adjust to the soft, shifting light filtering through the smoke hole above. The longhouse air, though still carrying the ghost of last night's cooking fires and the earthy scent of the floor, feels less biting than you might have imagined. And as you stretch, perhaps giving a little yawn that echoes just a little less than it would in a truly empty space, you start to notice the silent heroes of Viking interior design, the magnificent textiles adorning the walls. Imagine, for a moment, the bare walls of a longhouse. Depending on its construction, you might be looking at rough-hewn timber planks, perhaps some wattle and daub, or even simple stone. While sturdy, these materials are hardly known for their insulating properties. They're like that one friend who promises to keep a secret but immediately tells everyone they just let all the warmth escape. But the Vikings, ever resourceful, weren't about to let their cozy atmosphere dissipate into the cold Nordic air. Instead, they draped their interiors with an astonishing array of woven wonders, tapestries and hangings that served not just as decoration, but as vital, multifunctional layers of comfort and communication. You run a hand over the rough yet soft texture of a large wall hanging beside you. It's thick, undeniably so, woven from the same hardy sheep's wool that made up your blankets. This isn't just a pretty picture, it's a thermal shield. Think of it as the original, organic double glazing for your home, long before anyone even conceived of glass. Each thread, each tightly packed weave, created tiny pockets of air, trapping the precious warmth generated by the central hearth and preventing it from escaping through cracks and crevices in the longhouse walls. In a world without central heating, every degree mattered, and these hangings were the unsung heroes of energy efficiency. They were the original hygge before hygge was a trending hashtag, ensuring that even on the most blustery winter nights, the heart of the home remained a sanctuary, a place where you could truly thaw out after a long day of, say, foraging for berries, or perhaps just existing in the bracing outdoors. But their function extended beyond mere insulation. Consider the acoustics of a large, open longhouse filled with people, animals, and the general hubbub of daily life. The sounds of conversations, the clatter of tools, the rustling of straw, the occasional bleat of a sheep seeking refuge indoors, it could quickly become an overwhelming cacophony. Those soft, fibrous wall hangings acted like giant, ancient sound-dampening panels. They absorbed echoes and muffled ambient noise, creating a calmer, more pleasant auditory environment. It's the kind of subtle improvement you might not consciously notice until it's gone, like suddenly realizing how much more peaceful your modern home is after you finally hang those curtains you bought 3 years ago. So, while you're enjoying a quiet evening by the fire, listening to the gentle murmur of voices, you can thank these woven wonders for helping to keep the longhouse from sounding like a permanent, very loud barnyard disco. This practical, yet often overlooked, acoustic benefit is a quirky little tidbit that really highlights the sophisticated understanding Vikings had of their living spaces. Now, let your eyes drift across the wall, really taking in the patterns and colors. This is where the artistic magic truly comes alive. Forget stark, minimalist Scandinavian design for a moment. Viking interiors were vibrant. These hangings, often dyed with natural pigments derived from plants, minerals, and even insects, burst with earthy reds, blues, yellows, and greens. They transformed what could have been a dim, smoky interior into a canvas of shifting light and shadow, a dynamic backdrop to daily life. Imagine stepping into a longhouse on a dreary, overcast day, and being greeted by a wall ablaze with the depiction of a dragon, or a ship sailing across a stylized sea, or perhaps a procession of figures. It's like the ultimate before and after home renovation reveal, but instead of new countertops, you get an epic saga unfolding right on your wall. And what did these tapestries depict? Here's where they truly became woven stories. While we'll delve deeper into the specific motifs and meanings later, it's impossible to talk about wall hangings without acknowledging their narrative power. They weren't just abstract patterns. Many were grand, sprawling visual chronicles. You might find scenes from Norse mythology, depicting the gods and goddesses in their epic struggles and triumph. Or perhaps a tapestry would illustrate a famous saga, recounting the brave deeds of legendary heroes, battles fought, and journeys undertaken. Some were likely more mundane, yet equally valuable, depicting scenes of daily life. Farming, feasting, crafts, and social gatherings, offering a window into the rhythms of the community. These tapestries were the Viking equivalent of your favorite streaming service, but instead of binge-watching a new series, you'd simply gaze at the wall and immerse yourself in a timeless narrative, perhaps even pointing out your favorite characters or plot twists to your longhouse companions. The creation of these monumental textile pieces was a testament to incredible skill and patience. While smaller pieces might have been made on simple looms, the grand wall hangings, some of which could stretch for many meters, would have required significant effort, likely involving large warp-weighted looms and the collaborative work of several women. The sheer scale of some archaeological finds, like the astonishingly preserved fragments from the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, which depict scenes of processions, chariots, and mythological figures, provides concrete evidence of just how elaborate and large these wall hangings could be. These Oseberg textiles, though fragmented, offer us an invaluable glimpse into the artistic prowess and narrative ambition of Viking weavers, showcasing the intricate detail and vibrant color palettes they employed. It's a mainstream historical fact that these fragments are among the most significant textile discoveries from the Viking Age, proving that these weren't just humble blankets, but genuine works of art. These textiles weren't just hung haphazardly, their placement was strategic. They would have lined the interior walls, often behind the long benches that served as both seating and sleeping areas. This placement maximized their insulating effect, creating a warmer microclimate around the main living spaces. Imagine snuggling into your bed on a cold night, with the thick wool of a tapestry directly behind your head, blocking the chill that might otherwise seep in from the outside wall. It's a simple, elegant solution born of necessity and ingenuity. And while we know they were extensively used, historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these grand textile displays was pragmatic insulation or purely aesthetic grandeur, or perhaps an inseparable blend of both, adapting to the changing needs and status of the household. Beyond the grand tapestries, smaller hangings and embroidered cloths would have added further layers of visual interest and comfort. Perhaps a finely embroidered piece would highlight a particular area, like a chieftain's seat, or delineate a private space. They were not just static decorations. They were living parts of the home, absorbing the light, the smoke, and the stories of the people who lived among them. They would have been cared for, mended, and passed down through generations, each stitch holding a whisper of the past. So, the next time you picture a Viking longhouse, don't just envision rough timber and smoke. Add in the vibrant, textural embrace of these magnificent wall hangings. They were the very fabric of Viking comfort and expression, transforming a utilitarian structure into a warm, inviting, and visually rich sanctuary. They were the protectors of warmth, the dampeners of sound, and the silent storytellers that made a Viking home truly feel like home. Section 7. Now, as you stand there, wrapped in the imagined warmth of those textile-lined walls, let's peel back another layer, shall we? Because these weren't just pretty patterns designed to catch the eye or block a draft. Oh no. Viking textiles, particularly the tapestries and hangings, were vibrant, woven books. They were the original visual storytelling, long before Netflix or even illuminated manuscripts. You're about to discover that every stitch, every color, every intertwining line held a whispered tale, a hidden meaning, a piece of the very soul of the Viking world. Imagine leaning in, nose almost touching the coarse, yet surprisingly soft, wool of a wall hanging. You wouldn't just see a pattern, you'd read it. The most common visual language you'd encounter would be the animal motif. These weren't just cute little critters. They were powerful, symbolic beasts, often depicted in a style we now call gripping beast art. Picture a tangle of serpentine bodies, their limbs intertwining, jaws snapping, eyes wide with a primal energy. These weren't just decorative flourishes, they often symbolized chaos, power, and the untamed forces of nature. Sometimes they represented specific mythical creatures, like the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, whose colossal body encircled the entire world, or the terrifying wolf Fenrir, whose eventual escape would herald Ragnarok. It's like their version of a superhero comic, but with more fangs and less spandex. Then there are the birds. Ravens, for instance, were sacred to Odin, his two ravens, Hugin, thought, and Munin, memory, flying across the world daily to bring him news. Seeing a raven motif might remind you of wisdom, prophecy, or even the grim reality of battle, where ravens often feasted on the fallen. Eagles, too, soared through their art, embodying nobility and strength. It's a bit like how we might put a majestic lion on a family crest today, except for the Vikings, these animals were deeply integrated into their cosmology. Beyond the snarling beasts, you'd also find an astonishing array of geometric and interlace patterns. Think of intricate knots that seem to have no beginning or end, spiraling designs that draw your eye deeper and deeper into their labyrinthine depths. These weren't just for visual appeal, though they were certainly beautiful. The endless knots, for example, often symbolized eternity, the interconnectedness of all things, or perhaps even the cyclical nature of life and death. It's the kind of pattern that, if you stare at it too long after a long day of axe-throwing practice, might just make your eyes cross. Historians still debate whether these complex interlace patterns were purely aesthetic or always carried a specific mythological significance, but it's hard to deny the hypnotic pull of their endless flow. More rarely, but profoundly, you would encounter textiles depicting human figures or narrative scenes. The most famous examples come from the Oseberg ship burial, where fragments of an incredibly elaborate tapestry were found. This mainstream historical fact reveals a vibrant, detailed procession, possibly a religious ritual or a mythological narrative, complete with figures riding horses, chariots, and even a man leading an animal on a leash. Imagine walking into a longhouse and seeing a scene from the sagas unfolding on the wall, woven in vibrant wool. It would be like having your favorite epic poem constantly playing in your living room, without the annoying commercials. These were not just decorations, they were visual reminders of their shared history, their gods, their heroes, and their place in the cosmos. They reinforced communal memory and belief, acting as powerful cultural anchors in a world without widespread literacy. Sometimes you might even spot specific symbols woven into the fabric. While not as common on large tapestries as on smaller, personal items, symbols like Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, might appear, offering protection and strength. The Voknut, a symbol of three interlocking triangles, often associated with Odin and fallen warriors, could also be found. These weren't just abstract doodles, they were powerful sigils imbued with belief and intent. It's a bit like wearing a lucky charm, but instead of a tiny rabbit's foot in your pocket, you've got a massive, woven blessing on your wall. And speaking of luck, here's a quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that certain patterns, particularly the more abstract and complex ones, weren't just symbolic but also apotropaic, meaning they were believed to ward off evil spirits or bad luck. So, your cozy wall hanging wasn't just keeping you warm, it might have been actively chasing away ghouls while you slept. No wonder they felt so safe. The colors themselves also told a story. The rich reds, deep blues, earthy greens, and vibrant yellows weren't just chosen for aesthetic appeal. They spoke of the resources available, the skill of the dyer, and the effort invested. Madder root gave them those deep, passionate reds, while woad provided blues that could range from sky-like lightness to the profound depth of the ocean. These natural dyes were labor-intensive to produce, making a textile rich in varied, strong colors a clear indicator of wealth and status. It was like saying, "Yes, we're doing very well, thank you very much, and we have the perfectly dyed wall hanging to prove it." Think about the women who created these masterpieces. They were not merely craftspeople, they were the custodians of their culture's visual language, the weavers of memory and meaning. They translated abstract concepts, epic tales, and deep-seated beliefs into tangible form, stitch by painstaking stitch. They were the ultimate storytellers, creating narratives that would silently educate, inspire, and protect their families for generations. It's a job that required immense skill, patience, and a profound understanding of their world. Imagine trying to explain the symbolism of a particularly complex gripping beast pattern to a restless toddler. No, Bjorn, that's not a fluffy cat. That's the embodiment of primordial chaos. Now, stop pulling on it. So, when you picture a Viking home, don't just see functional textiles. See a living gallery, a vibrant library of woven stories. Each tapestry, each blanket, each cushion cover wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a conversation piece, a teaching tool, a protective charm, and a testament to the rich inner world of the people who created and lived among them. They were a constant, silent reminder of their beliefs, their heritage, and their connection to the vast, mysterious cosmos. It was a language spoken not with words, but with wool, a symphony of symbols that resonated deeply within the longhouse walls. You might even find yourself wishing you had a woven saga hanging in your own living room, just to add a bit of ancient mystique to your modern life. Section 8. Now, imagine you're inside that longhouse again, feeling the cool, earthy breath of the floor beneath your bare feet. No underfloor heating here, sadly, not even a heated towel rail for your frosty toes. The foundational layer of any Viking home was, quite literally, the earth itself. Packed earth, often clay-rich, it was firm, yes, but undeniably cold, particularly during those long, dark Nordic winters. You wouldn't want to spend too much time lounging directly on it, unless you were a particularly hardy Viking or perhaps a very determined earthworm. But here's where the ingenuity, and indeed, the unexpected coziness, truly begins to unfold. The Vikings, bless their practical hearts, weren't about to let a little thing like a perpetually chilly floor dampen their domestic spirit. Oh no. They transformed that cold, hard ground into something genuinely inviting, something that whispered, "Come, sit, relax, perhaps even take a little nap right here." And they did it with two primary, wonderfully tactile materials, woven mats and animal hides. Let's start with the woven mat. Picture them. Thick, sturdy, yet surprisingly pliant underfoot. These weren't your flimsy, decorative placemats. These were robust, utilitarian pieces of textile engineering designed for serious comfort. They were crafted from readily available natural materials, reeds, rushes, straw, even strips of willow bark, all expertly plaited and woven together. Imagine the gentle rustle as you shuffle across them, a soft, dry whisper that replaces the hollow thud of dirt. You can almost feel the slight give beneath your weight, absorbing some of the impact, insulating you from the chill rising from below. It's like a natural, biodegradable carpet, perfectly suited to the environment. And let's be honest, cleaning an earthen floor is a project. But a mat? You can shake it out, replace it when it gets too worn or soiled. Much more civilized. These mats weren't just about softness, they were about insulation. A thick layer of woven plant fibers creates pockets of air, trapping warmth and preventing that bone-chilling cold from seeping up into your very soul. It's the ancient equivalent of a thermal layer for your floor. And depending on the materials used, they might have even released a subtle, earthy fragrance, the scent of dried grasses, perhaps a hint of the fields from which they came, a grounding aroma that subtly connected the indoors with the wild beauty outside. Some historians even suggest that certain fragrant herbs or plants might have been deliberately woven into these mats, not just for their pleasant aroma but also perhaps to deter insects or simply to freshen the air. Imagine stepping onto a mat subtly infused with the scent of wild mint or chamomile after a long day of, well, Viking-ing. Quite the sensory upgrade, wouldn't you agree? Then, perched atop these foundational mats, or perhaps in prime locations near the hearth or alongside the sleeping platforms, you'd find the piece de resistance: animal hides. Ah, the animal hide. This is where the luxury in underfoot luxury truly earns its stripes. Sheepskins, naturally, were abundant. Their thick, lanolin-rich wool provided unparalleled warmth and softness. Imagine sinking your toes into that dense, springy fleece after a bracing walk outside. It's like a cloud for your feet, only warmer and slightly more sheep-smelling. But in the best possible way, of course. Beyond sheep, you'd find the hides of other domestic animals like cows, providing larger, more durable surfaces. And for the more prosperous households, perhaps even the skins of wilder beasts: deer, reindeer, or even the formidable bear. These weren't just functional, they were statements. A large, well-tanned bear hide near the chieftain's seat wouldn't just keep his feet warm, it would loudly proclaim his prowess as a hunter and his wealth. It's the Viking equivalent of a plush, designer rug, only with significantly more historical gravitas and, let's face it, a much more interesting story behind its acquisition. Oh, this old thing? Just wrestled it down myself last Tuesday, darling. The preparation of these hides, while perhaps not always to modern tanning standards, was sufficient to make them pliable and durable. They would have been scraped, stretched, possibly treated with smoke or bark extracts to prevent putrefaction and preserve their suppleness. The goal was to create a material that was not only insulating but also comfortable to sit or lie upon. Because remember, much of Viking life, especially in the evening, revolved around the floor. There were no rows of chairs and sofas as we know them. People would sit directly on the floor, often cross-legged or reclining, leaning against the walls or perhaps a low bench. These hides and mats made that existence not just tolerable, but genuinely comfortable. You could stretch out, read a saga, or listen to one being recited, mend a fishing net, or simply doze by the flickering fire, all without feeling the persistent chill of the earth seeping into your bones. It transformed the floor from a mere surface to a living, welcoming space. Think about the sensory experience again, the gentle give of the woven mat underneath, topped by the deep, yielding softness of a sheepskin. The way the firelight would catch the individual fibers, making them glow with a subtle warmth. The faint, comforting scent of wool, perhaps mingled with the smokiness of the longhouse hearth. It's a multi-sensory embrace of comfort. And yes, occasionally, a rogue straw might poke you, reminding you that luxury in the Viking Age wasn't always perfectly ergonomic, but it was there. One mainstream historical fact we can confidently assert is that the use of animal hides and woven plant fiber mats was a ubiquitous and essential aspect of Viking domestic life, providing both insulation and comfort on their unheated earthen floors. Archaeological excavations, particularly those in well-preserved sites like Greenland or areas with peat bogs, have yielded fragments of these textiles and hides, confirming their widespread use. While complete, pristine examples are rare due to the organic nature of the materials, the evidence is compelling. Now, for a quirky tidbit. While we often think of these as simply functional, there's a theory that some of the more elaborate woven mats might have been imbued with symbolic patterns, much like the tapestries we discussed earlier. Perhaps specific weaving patterns were believed to offer protection, or to bring good fortune to the household. It's a charming thought, isn't it? That even the very ground beneath your feet could be a silent guardian. And finally, for a point of scholarly contemplation, Historians still argue whether these floor coverings were routinely cleaned or simply replaced when they became too soiled or worn. Given the labor-intensive nature of textile production and the value placed on materials, it's likely they were cleaned as best as possible, perhaps beaten, aired out, or brushed. But the sheer practicality of replacing a worn-out mat with a fresh one, especially if materials were plentiful, also makes sense. Imagine trying to explain vacuum cleaner to a Viking. Their eyes would probably glaze over, or they'd offer you a goat in exchange for this magical dirt-eating beast. So, the next time you picture a Viking home, don't just see a rough-hewn structure with a dirt floor. Instead, envision a space where every step was cushioned, where the chill was held at bay by layers of natural warmth, and where the ground itself became a soft, inviting canvas for daily life. It's a far cry from barren, isn't it? It's a testament to how even the most basic elements could be transformed into sources of profound comfort and subtle domestic luxury. Section 9. You've explored the warmth woven into the walls, the softness laid upon the earth, and now, your weary legs, after imagining all that standing around in a longhouse, are probably begging for a sit-down. And guess what? The Vikings were way ahead of you. No, you won't be flopping onto a plush, overstuffed sectional with built-in cup holders and a remote control caddy. This isn't HGTV's Viking Renovation Challenge. But you will discover an unexpected layer of domesticity, a surprising commitment to personal comfort that often gets overlooked in the sagas of axes and adventures, the humble yet utterly essential cushion and padded seat. Imagine, if you will, the typical longhouse interior. Along the long walls, you've got those sturdy, built-in benches, often made of wood, sometimes earth-packed and timber-faced. These weren't just for sitting. They were the central social hubs, the dining areas, and, at night, the sleeping platforms. Now, picture yourself settling onto one of those hard, unyielding surfaces after a day of, let's say, vigorously negotiating trade deals in a brisk Nordic breeze, or perhaps just chasing a particularly stubborn goat around the farm. Not exactly inviting, is it? Your modern posterior, accustomed to the gentle embrace of memory foam and spring coils, would rebel almost instantly. This is where the textile magic truly kicks in, transforming a mere plank into a surprisingly cozy perch. Think of it as the original ergonomic solution, Viking style. While they might not have had fancy lumbar supports or adjustable heights, they understood the basic principle of, ouch, my butt hurts, let's put something soft here. And so, you'd find these benches softened, made hospitable, by a variety of ingenious textile solutions. The most common, and certainly the most comfortable, would have been cushions. These weren't mere decorative throw pillows you artfully arrange for Instagram. These were workhorses of comfort, designed for utility first, and often beauty second. Run your hand, in your mind's eye, along the coarse, yet surprisingly soft, exterior of one of these cushions. It would likely be woven from the same hardy sheep's wool or sturdy flax we discussed earlier, perhaps in a plain tabby weave, or maybe a more complex twill for extra durability and a subtle texture. The colors might be earthy and muted, the natural browns, creams, and grays of undyed wool, or vibrant with natural dyes, the deep reds from madder, the rich blues from woad, the sunny yellows from weld. Each cushion, in its own way, a testament to the weaver's skill and the household's resources. Now, what about the stuffing? This is where the Viking ingenuity, and perhaps a touch of historical guesswork, comes into play. You see, while we have archaeological evidence of the cushion covers, fragments of fabric, sometimes even with stitching still intact, the perishable internal fillings rarely survive the centuries. So, you have to imagine what a Viking homemaker, resourceful and practical, would use. The most luxurious, and therefore rarest, would undoubtedly be feathers, goose, duck, or even eiderdown, plucked from the birds after molting or from nests. Imagine sinking into a cushion stuffed with down, a cloud of warmth and softness after a long day. It's the Viking equivalent of your favorite beanbag chair, just with a slightly more rustic aroma. But feathers were precious, not something every household would have in abundance for every single seating surface. So, what else? Well, you might find cushions stuffed with dried grasses, perhaps hay or straw, which would provide a springy, if slightly rustly, support. Imagine the gentle whisper of dried stalks as you shift your weight, a subtle reminder of the harvest. Or perhaps, for a more robust and longer-lasting option, wool clippings or even moss. Yes, moss. Not the damp, squishy kind you find on rocks, but dried, processed moss that could offer surprising resilience and insulation. Historians still debate the exact prevalence of specific stuffing materials, as direct evidence is scarce, but the principle remains. If it could be gathered, dried, and stuffed, it was fair game for Viking comfort. These cushions weren't just for the long benches. You'd also find them on individual stools, particularly those used by the chieftain or the lady of the house, perhaps even on the occasional, more elaborate chair if the household was wealthy enough to possess such a luxury item. Picture the chieftain, holding court, not on a cold, hard wooden throne, but on a seat softened by a thick, perhaps embroidered, cushion. It's a subtle shift in perception, isn't it? From stern, unyielding warrior to someone who appreciates a bit of padding for their posterior, just like the rest of us. It brings them a little closer to our own domestic realities. Because, let's be honest, even the fiercest Viking berserker probably appreciated not getting splinters in there. Well, you know. The addition of these padded elements wasn't just about pure physical comfort, though that was certainly a major benefit. It also added a profound layer of domesticity, a sense of home that goes beyond mere shelter. A hard bench is functional. A cushioned bench invites you to linger, to relax, to tell stories by the fire late into the night. It speaks of a space designed for living, for community, for unwinding. It transforms a utilitarian structure into a sanctuary. It's the difference between a school cafeteria bench and your favorite armchair. One is for eating, the other is for living. Think about the sensory experience. You've got the warmth of the wool, insulating you from the chill of the bench beneath. The slight give of the stuffing, molding to your form. The subtle scent of lanolin from the wool, perhaps mingled with the faint, earthy aroma of the straw or moss within. It's a multi-sensory invitation to settle in, to get cozy. For a people who spent much of their lives outdoors, braving the elements, these small pockets of indoor comfort would have been incredibly valuable, a daily luxury that we, with our ubiquitous upholstered furniture, often take for granted. You might grumble about your sofa being too firm, but imagine the sheer joy of a Viking finding a perfectly plump cushion after a long voyage. Beyond the practicalities, these cushions also offered another canvas for artistic expression and a display of wealth. A simple, plain cushion might be standard, but a chieftain's cushion could be a masterpiece of weaving, perhaps featuring intricate patterns, dyed in expensive colors, or even adorned with a bit of embroidery. While the most elaborate embroidery might be reserved for wall hangings or clothing, a touch of decorative stitching on a cushion would certainly signify status. It's a bit like comparing a standard-issue office chair to a bespoke, leather-bound executive model. Both serve the purpose of sitting, but one tells a much grander story. So, the next time you picture a Viking longhouse, don't just envision rough-hewn timbers and a smoky fire. Take a moment to imagine the softer side, the quiet comfort woven into the fabric of daily life. Picture the family gathered on those benches, softened by thick woolen cushions, perhaps sharing a meal, telling tales, or simply resting weary bones. It's a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of Viking women, who were the primary creators of these textile comforts, transforming raw materials into essential elements of home. They weren't just making stuff for the house, they were crafting warmth, solace, and a deep sense of belonging. And that, my friend, is a comfort that transcends centuries. Section 10. You've settled into your cozy Viking longhouse, nestled amongst the cushions, wrapped in a blanket, the scent of wood smoke, and perhaps a hint of last night's stew lingering in the air. But as you gaze across the vast, open space, a thought might occur to you. Where, exactly, is the privacy in all of this? Longhouses, by their very nature, were often communal, sprawling halls designed to house not just one family, but sometimes extended kin, their workers, and even their livestock in adjoining sections. Imagine a modern studio apartment, but for 20 people, a few sheep, and a forge. It sounds intimate, to say the least. This is where the ingenious practicality of Viking textiles truly shines, transforming what could have been a chaotic free-for-all into a surprisingly adaptable living environment. Far from rigid, permanent walls, the Vikings mastered the art of the movable partition, using textiles to create flexible, temporary divisions that could be erected, shifted, or taken down with remarkable ease. Think of it as the original open-plan living, but with the ability to instantly create rooms, when needed, like a pop-up privacy tent for your entire household. No more awkwardly trying to have a private conversation about, say, Uncle Thorbjorn's snoring habits while he's just a few feet away, pretending to be asleep. One of the most crucial functions of these textile partitions was to delineate sleeping quarters. While some longhouses had built-in wooden sleeping platforms or alcoves along the walls, these were still often open to the main hall. To truly create a sense of individual or family space, thick, heavy woolen curtains would have been hung. Imagine the subtle rustle as you draw a woven curtain across your bed nook, suddenly cocooned in your own personal sanctuary. The fabric, often densely woven, wouldn't just offer visual privacy. It would also muffle sounds, creating a quieter, more intimate space for rest. You could finally snore in peace, or at least, without the immediate judgment of your longhouse roommates. These weren't just simple sheets. They were often elaborate hangings, carefully crafted to be both functional and beautiful, perhaps even featuring patterns that identified the family or individual occupying that space. It's like having your own personalized, "Do not disturb" sign, but made of sheep's wool and Viking ingenuity. Beyond the realm of dreams, textiles also played a vital role in segmenting the longhouse for various daily activities. The main hall might be a bustling hub during the day, with cooking fires blazing, tools clanging, and conversations flowing. But what if you needed a quiet corner for meticulous needlework, or a secluded space for sorting herbs, or even just a place to store valuable goods away from the main thoroughfare? Textile screens and hangings provided the perfect solution. A heavy curtain might separate the kitchen area from the main living space, helping to contain the smoke and cooking smells, or at least making them a little less pervasive in the sleeping zones. Another might cordon off a crafting area, allowing an artisan to focus on their work without constant interruption from the general hubbub. It was like having an instant office space, or craft room, that could be packed away at the end of the day, leaving the main hall open for communal feasting or storytelling. The beauty of these textile divisions lay in their adaptability. Unlike solid walls, which permanently dictate a building's layout, curtains and screens could be moved or removed entirely, allowing the longhouse to transform its function throughout the day or even with the seasons. A large gathering might require an open, expansive hall, with all partitions drawn back. A more intimate family meal, or a period of quiet contemplation, might see specific areas cordoned off. This flexibility was paramount in a communal living environment where needs constantly shifted. It was the ultimate open-concept design, only with the added superpower of instant room creation. You could literally redecorate your entire floor plan in an afternoon, no sledgehammer required. Historians still argue whether these textile partitions were a universal feature across all Viking longhouses, or if their prevalence varied significantly based on social status, regional traditions, or even the specific design of the longhouse itself. Was every sleeping nook guaranteed a curtain, or was it a luxury reserved for the more affluent? Archaeological evidence, while sparse for textiles due to their perishable nature, combined with sagas and art, suggests they were indeed common. We know that longhouses could be incredibly long, sometimes over 100 feet, making some form of internal division almost a necessity for any semblance of order or comfort. The materials used for these partitions would have varied but primarily consisted of the same durable fibers found in other Viking textiles: wool and linen. Wool, with its inherent warmth and sound-dampening qualities, would have been ideal for sleeping areas, offering both insulation and a sense of enclosure. Linen, lighter and perhaps more translucent, might have been used for more temporary or less private divisions, allowing some light to filter through while still creating a visual barrier. Animal hides, particularly large ones from cattle or reindeer, could also have been employed for their robust nature and insulating properties, though perhaps less common for everyday partitions due to their weight and rigidity compared to woven fabric. Imagine the subtle scent of cured leather mingling with the earthy smell of wool. The methods of hanging these textiles would have been simple but effective. Wooden poles or ropes stretched across the width of the longhouse, or perhaps from the rafters, would have served as the framework. The textiles themselves might have had loops, rings, or ties along their top edge, allowing them to be easily slipped onto these supports. This system meant that partitions could be quickly put up or taken down, rolled up and stored when not in use, or even moved from one part of the house to another as needed. It was an elegant, low-tech solution to a very human problem: the desire for personal space, even in the most communal of settings. Think about the sensory experience of this textile architecture. The visual clutter of a large, open space could be instantly reduced, creating a sense of calm and order. The constant echoes of voices, footsteps, and the crackle of the fire might be softened, creating pockets of relative quiet. The very act of drawing a curtain would have been a deliberate gesture of demarcation, a gentle signal that a space was now private, a moment of transition from public to personal. It speaks volumes about the Viking appreciation for practical comfort and the subtle nuances of social interaction, even in a society often stereotyped for its bluntness. These weren't just functional dividers. They were woven expressions of domesticity, allowing a large, bustling longhouse to feel, paradoxically, like a collection of smaller, more intimate homes within a home. Section 11. You've probably seen the sleek, minimalist interiors that dominate modern design magazines, all clean lines and sparse furnishings, meant to convey a sense of calm and sophistication. Well, the Vikings had their own version of a status symbol, but instead of a single, perfectly placed abstract sculpture, imagine an entire house that screamed, "We're doing well." And the loudest part of that scream? The textiles. Yes, the very same cozy fabrics we've been exploring weren't just for warmth and comfort, they were the ultimate flex, a vibrant, tactile declaration of wealth and standing within the community. Picture yourself stepping into a Viking longhouse. Now, don't just see the rough-hewn timbers and the central hearth. Look closer, let your eyes drift over every surface. What immediately catches your attention in a truly prosperous home isn't the size of the building, though that helps, but the sheer abundance of textiles. It's not just one blanket on a bed bench. It's layers upon layers, thick and heavy, spilling over the edges. Wall hangings aren't just functional insulators. They are numerous, overlapping, creating a visual tapestry that swallows the rough timber walls beneath. Cushions aren't sparse. They are piled high, inviting you to sink into a nest of woven comfort. This wasn't merely practical. It was a deliberate, in-your-face display of resources. You know you've made it when your longhouse is basically a textile warehouse, and you don't even have an IKEA to help you organize it all. The quantity of textiles alone was a huge indicator. Think about it. Every single thread had to be spun, every inch woven. This wasn't a quick trip to the fabric store. To have an excess of blankets, to have multiple sets of bedding, to drape your walls in tapestries, meant you had a massive surplus of wool or flax, and, more importantly, a significant labor force, likely the women of the household, or perhaps even hired hands dedicated solely to textile production. It spoke volumes about your access to raw materials and the number of skilled hands working tirelessly under your roof. It was like having multiple luxury cars parked in your driveway, but for Vikings it was woven art that kept you warm. But quantity was only part of the story. The quality of these textiles was perhaps even more telling. You might not have had a thread count number stitched onto the corner of your Viking blanket, but trust me, discerning eyes knew. A fine, tightly woven fabric, soft to the touch, with a consistent, even weave, spoke of superior wool, perhaps from specialized breeds of sheep, or carefully selected fleeces, and the incredible skill of the weaver. Imagine the difference between a rough, scratchy wool sack and a piece of fabric so finely spun it almost feels like cashmere. The latter was a testament to hours of meticulous work, a precision that could only come from years of practice and an artisan's dedication. These weren't mass-produced items. Each was a unique creation, carrying the invisible signature of its maker's expertise. And then there were the colors. Oh, the colors! In a world where natural dyes were the norm, vibrant, consistent hues were incredibly difficult and costly to achieve. While you might expect earthy browns and muted grays from natural wool, the truly wealthy homes would burst with rich reds from madder root, deep blues from woad, and possibly even brilliant yellows from various plants. Achieving these colors required not only the right plant materials, which might need to be traded for, but also a deep understanding of the dyeing process, often involving multiple mordants and repeated dip. It was an art and a science, and a deep, true red or a striking blue wasn't just pretty. It was a billboard declaring, "We can afford the good stuff, and we know how to use it." It's like comparing a crayon drawing to a masterpiece painted with rare pigments. Both are art, but one has a far more impressive material cost. Now, let's talk about the ultimate status symbol, the textile equivalent of a private jet: exotic materials. While wool and flax were the workhorses of Viking textile production, the truly elite households showcased materials that had traveled vast distances along the intricate Viking trade networks. The most coveted of these, without a doubt, was silk. Imagine a longhouse, usually filled with the comforting, slightly rough texture of wool, suddenly featuring a shimmering, smooth piece of silk. Mainstream historical fact: archaeological discoveries in prominent Viking burial sites, particularly Birka and Hedeby, have unearthed fragments of silk, sometimes even woven with gold and silver threads, providing tangible evidence of its presence in Viking Scandinavia. This wasn't just a rumor, it was a reality for the wealthy elite. Silk didn't come from the local sheep. It came from the distant east, along the Silk Road, through Byzantium, and across the vast waterways and land routes of Eastern Europe. Its very presence in a Viking home was a testament to global connections, successful trade ventures, and immense wealth. The subtle sheen of silk, its delicate drape, its incredible softness against the skin, it was unlike anything else available in the Nordic world. And when these precious silks were embroidered with metallic threads of gold and silver, painstakingly worked into intricate patterns, they became living jewels, catching the flickering light of the hearth and radiating an undeniable aura of luxury. It was the ultimate "look what I brought back from my travels" souvenir, except it cost a king's ransom. Quirky or fringe tidbit: historians have even speculated that the smell of certain exotic textiles, infused with foreign spices or perfumes from their long journey, might have also contributed to their perceived value and status. Imagine a faint whiff of sandalwood or something similarly exotic clinging to a silk cloth, adding another layer to its allure, a subtle olfactory signal of far-flung connections. It's a bit like buying a vintage leather jacket that still carries the faint scent of its original owner's expensive cologne. It just feels more authentic, more exclusive. These foreign textiles weren't always integrated into large, functional pieces like blankets. Often, they appeared as trims, borders, or small, precious inserts on garments, cushions, or smaller hangings. A narrow band of shimmering silk woven into the edge of a wool tunic, or a small, intricately embroidered silk pouch, would stand out dramatically against the more utilitarian local fabric. It was a subtle, yet unmistakable declaration of, we have access to things you can only dream of. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue whether some of these exotic textiles, especially silk, were purely for ostentatious display, or if they also held specific ritualistic or symbolic significance beyond mere material wealth. Were they perhaps reserved for special occasions, or did they serve as protective amulets, imbued with power from distant lands? We know they were valuable, but their full cultural role remains a topic of fascinating discussion. So, when you consider the textiles in a Viking home, you're not just thinking about warmth. You're thinking about the economic engine that powered their creation, the sheep, the land to graze them, the flax fields. You're thinking about the human capital, the skilled hands that spun, dyed, and wove with such mastery. You're thinking about the global reach, the ships and traders who braved perilous journeys to bring back shimmering silks and rare dyes from distant lands. Every thread, every pattern, every vibrant hue was a deliberate choice, a statement. A longhouse brimming with high-quality, abundant, and exotic textiles wasn't just comfortable, it was a living, breathing advertisement for the household's prosperity, influence, and connections. It showed that they were not just surviving the harsh Nordic climate, they were thriving within it, and doing so with a surprising amount of style and luxury. It was the original flex, long before Instagram made it a thing. The Viking home, far from being a barren, stark place, was a deeply inviting, textile-rich sanctuary where comfort and status were woven together, literally, into the very fabric of daily life. Section 12. So, we've talked about all these incredible textiles, these layers of warmth and beauty that transformed a Viking longhouse into a cozy haven. But who, you might be wondering, was behind all this intricate, time-consuming artistry? Who spun the yarn, wove the patterns, and stitched the details that brought these spaces to life? The answer, my sleepy listener, lies squarely in the hands of Viking women. You see, while the men might have been off raiding, trading, or tending to the fields, the domestic world, and especially the textile industry of the Viking Age, was overwhelmingly the domain of women. This wasn't just a hobby. It was a fundamental, indispensable aspect of household economy and survival. Imagine, if you will, the sheer, unyielding dedication required. You wake up, the longhouse is still cool, the fire is just being coaxed back to life, and your hands are already reaching for the spindle. It's not just about making a pretty blanket, it's about ensuring your family doesn't freeze when the Nordic winds howl. Think of it this way. If a modern home relies on a steady supply of electricity, a Viking home relied on a steady supply of textiles. And Viking women were the power grid. They were the engineers, the designers, the manufacturers, and the quality control managers all rolled into one. From the moment the raw wool was shorn from the sheep or the flax harvested from the fields, their work began. You can almost feel the lanolin on your fingers as you picture them sorting, cleaning, and carding the wool, transforming matted clumps into fluffy, manageable fibers. It's a bit like trying to untangle a particularly stubborn ball of yarn after your cat's had its way with it, but on an industrial scale, and without the benefit of a podcast to distract you. The first crucial step, of course, was spinning. You hold the distaff, a stick cradling the prepared fibers, in one hand, while the other deftly manipulates the spindle, a weighted stick, as it twirls and draws out the fibers into a continuous thread. It's a rhythmic, almost meditative process, one that could be done while walking, talking, or even watching the kids, or, more likely, teaching them how to do it. This wasn't just a quick tick-tock craft. This was hours, days, weeks of repetitive motion to produce enough yarn for even a single garment, let alone a grand tapestry. A single Viking woman could produce several miles of yarn in a year, a truly astounding feat when you consider it was all done by hand. Imagine your grandma knitting you a scarf, but then multiply that effort by 1,000 and you start to get the picture. Once the yarn was spun, it was time for weaving. And here, the piece de resistance of the Viking textile workshop comes into view, the warp-weighted loom. This was a tall, upright wooden frame, often leaning against a wall in the longhouse. You see the warp threads, stretched taut from a top beam, weighted down at the bottom by clay or stone loom weight. These little weights, often found in archaeological digs, are like tiny, silent testaments to the constant hum of textile production that filled these homes. You then pass the weft threads horizontally through the warp, pushing them up with a sword-like beating stick to create a dense, sturdy fabric. This was often a communal activity, with women working side by side, their hands moving in sync, perhaps sharing stories or passing on family lore as the fabric slowly grew. It wasn't exactly a Netflix and chill experience, but it was certainly a central social hub. The sheer volume of textiles needed meant that weaving was not just a skill, but a constant occupation. Every piece of clothing, every blanket, every wall hanging, every sail for a ship, yes, they wove those too, required immense amounts of yarn and labor. A single longhouse might have several looms operating simultaneously, transforming the space into a buzzing, clacking, creative hub. This wasn't just about utility, it was about art. The patterns, the colors, the textures, these were all carefully chosen and executed, reflecting both personal taste and cultural traditions. It's like their version of interior design magazines, only instead of flipping pages, they were creating the very fabric of their homes. And let's not forget the dyeing. Before weaving, or sometimes after, the yarn or fabric would be dyed using natural pigments extracted from plants, roots, insects, and minerals. Imagine the earthy smells of woad for blues, madder for reds, or weld for yellows permeating the air. This was a complex chemical process, requiring knowledge of specific plants, mordants, substances to fix the dye, and careful temperature control. It was less like a trip to the fabric store and more like a high-stakes, ancestral chemistry experiment, with the added bonus of potentially staining your hands purple for weeks. Historians still debate the precise economic autonomy that textile production afforded Viking women, and whether their crafting was solely domestic or often for wider trade. It's clear, however, that the ability to produce high-quality textiles was a significant source of power and influence. The quality and quantity of textiles a woman produced were direct reflections of her skill, her industry, and by extension, the wealth and status of her household. A woman renowned for her weaving prowess would be highly regarded, her textiles potentially serving as valuable trade goods or prestigious gifts. In sagas, we often hear of women being praised for their beautiful weaving or their ability to mend garments with such skill that the repairs were invisible. This was their equivalent of a 5-star Yelp review, but instead of a restaurant, it was for their masterful needlework. Beyond the loom, there was the intricate world of embroidery. You picture the delicate needles, possibly made of bone or bronze, moving in and out of fabric, adding intricate patterns, mythical creatures, or geometric designs. These weren't just decorative flourishes. They were often symbolic, telling stories, invoking protection, or simply marking ownership. It's the Viking version of personalized monogramming, but with way more dragons and fewer initials. The Bayeux Tapestry, while Norman, gives you a sense of the scale and narrative power that textiles could hold, and similar, though usually smaller, embroidered pieces would have adorned Viking homes and clothing. The transmission of these skills was inherently intergenerational. From a young age, girls would learn from their mothers, grandmothers, and older sisters. You might remember trying to learn to tie your shoes or ride a bike, but imagine being taught how to spin and weave from toddlerhood, your small fingers learning the rhythm and tension necessary to create strong, even thread. It was an apprenticeship that lasted a lifetime, ensuring that these vital skills were passed down, unbroken, through generations. This was their vocational school, their art academy, and their home economics class, all rolled into one demanding, yet ultimately empowering, curriculum. Archaeological finds consistently highlight the importance of textile production. Excavations of Viking settlements frequently uncover spindle whorls, the weights for spindles, Loom weights, needles, shears, and even fragments of textiles themselves, preserved in peat bogs or burial mounds. These small, often unassuming artifacts are powerful reminders of the constant, quiet industry that defined so much of Viking domestic life. One quirky tidbit. Some archaeological sites have revealed specialized spinning houses or dedicated textile workshops, suggesting that for some larger or wealthier households, textile production was so significant it required its own dedicated space, a kind of ancient home factory, perhaps even with a distinct, earthy smell of wool and dye. So next time you picture a Viking, don't just envision a bearded warrior with an axe. Remember the equally formidable woman, her hands calloused from years of spinning and weaving, her mind sharp with the knowledge of dyes and patterns, her back aching from hours at the loom. She was the one who ensured warmth, comfort, and beauty permeated the longhouse. She was the unsung hero of Viking domesticity, the true architect of that surprising coziness we've been exploring. Her skill and labor were the very threads that wove together the fabric of Viking society. Without her, the longhouse would have been a cold, barren shell, a far cry from the inviting, textile-rich sanctuary it truly was. Section 13. You've probably pictured the Viking longship, sleek and powerful, cutting through the waves, sails billowing. But now, let's imagine those ships not just bringing back plunder and tales of distant lands, but also something far more subtle, yet utterly transformative for the Viking home: textiles. Yes, those very same vessels that struck fear into the hearts of many also served as the ultimate delivery service, bringing global threads right to the heart of Scandinavia, enriching the cozy domesticity we've been exploring. Think about it. For all their self-sufficiency in crafting wool and flax, the Vikings were never truly isolated. Their very nature, their insatiable curiosity, and their strategic geographic position at the crossroads of northern Europe, the Baltic, and the vast river systems leading into Eastern Europe and beyond, made them master traders. They weren't just raiders. They were entrepreneurs, deal-makers, and connoisseurs of exotic goods. And among the most coveted of these goods were fabrics and dyes that simply couldn't be produced at home. Imagine a chieftain's longhouse in, say, Hedeby, one of the great Viking trade hubs. You walk in, expecting only the familiar scent of wood smoke and damp wool. But then, a flash of something shimmering catches your eye. It's not the sturdy, earthy wool you've come to know. No, this fabric drapes with an almost liquid grace, reflecting the firelight in a way that wool simply cannot. You're looking at silk, my friend. Real, honest-to-goodness silk, transported thousands of miles from the distant lands of Persia, Byzantium, or even further east, along the fabled Silk Road. Can you imagine the look on a Viking's face, accustomed to the glorious ruggedness of their own wool, when first presented with the smooth, cool caress of silk? It must have been like discovering a cloud could be woven. So, it's sheep hair from very, very sleepy, shiny sheep? You might have heard a confused Viking ask, trying to fathom its origin. The journey of silk to Viking lands is a fascinating tale in itself. It wasn't a direct flight, of course. These luxurious threads often traveled through a complex network of intermediaries, through the bustling markets of the Abbasid Caliphate, up the great rivers of Eastern Europe, the Dnieper, the Volga, navigated by the Rus Vikings, who acted as crucial links in this global supply chain. They traded furs, amber, slaves, and iron for these precious goods. So, that silk tapestry adorning a wall, or that delicate silk trim on a cushion, represented not just wealth, but a vast web of human connection stretching across continents. It was a tangible piece of a world far, far away, brought right into your surprisingly cozy living room. Beyond silk, other fine fabrics made their way north. Think of the exquisite linens from the Frankish kingdoms, woven with a fineness and consistency that might have surpassed even the best Scandinavian flax. These weren't just about softness, they were about prestige. A bed draped in such fine linen, perhaps even embroidered with foreign patterns, would have spoken volumes about the owner's connections and prosperity. It's like today when you see a particularly rare, high thread count sheet set, you just know someone's doing well. For the Vikings, these imported fabrics were the ultimate status symbol, a soft, luxurious fleck. And then there were the dyes. Oh, the dyes! While Viking women were adept at extracting colors from local plants and minerals, the ochres, the woads, the madder, the trade routes opened up a whole new spectrum of vibrant, stable hues. Imagine deep, rich indigo from India or Persia, producing blues far more intense than anything local woad could achieve. Or perhaps brilliant reds derived from imported madder root, or even the incredibly rare and expensive kermes from insects, though that was more common in later periods. These vibrant pigments transformed textiles from merely functional to truly spectacular. A wall hanging dyed with imported materials would have glowed in the dim longhouse light, turning the practical act of insulation into an artistic statement. It's like going from a limited edition crayon box to the full 120 color set. Suddenly, your domestic canvas became infinitely more exciting. These new materials didn't just add color and texture, they also subtly introduced new technique. While the core of Viking weaving remained robust and traditional, exposure to foreign textiles could inspire new patterns, new ways of manipulating threads, or even new finishing processes. Perhaps a chieftain's wife, admiring a Byzantine brocade, might have instructed her weavers to try replicating a similar intricate pattern, adapting it to their own looms and materials. The cross-cultural exchange wasn't just about acquiring finished goods, it was about learning and innovation. Historians still argue whether certain complex tablet weaving patterns found in Viking graves were purely indigenous innovations or if they show subtle influences from textile traditions encountered during trade or raids in the East. Consider the sheer variety this global textile trade brought. Your home, which once relied solely on the local sheep and flax fields, could now feature a patchwork of textures and origins. The rough, familiar comfort of local wool blankets, juxtaposed with the smooth, cool elegance of Frankish linen sheets, and the shimmering, exotic beauty of a silk wall hanging, perhaps even a cushion upholstered with a rich, patterned brocade from Byzantium. Each piece told a story, not just of its maker, but of its journey across seas and lands. It transformed the longhouse from a simple dwelling into a veritable museum of global craftsmanship, a testament to the Viking spirit of exploration and connection. These imported textiles were, of course, primarily for the wealthy elite. The sheer cost and rarity meant that only chieftains, powerful landowners, and successful merchants could afford to adorn their homes with such luxuries. A glimpse of silk or a brightly dyed tapestry in a longhouse would immediately signal the owner's elevated status, their access to distant networks, and their considerable wealth. It was a visible manifestation of power, far more impressive than a pile of silver coins hidden away. You could literally feel their influence in the softness of their cushions. Even something as seemingly simple as a new type of thread could spark innovation. Imagine a Viking artisan, accustomed to working with wool, experimenting with a finer, stronger linen thread brought from afar. This might lead to new embroidery techniques, allowing for more delicate and intricate designs than previously possible. Or perhaps the introduction of new types of needles or tools, inspired by foreign craftsmanship, could make textile work more efficient or allow for more complex stitches. The ripple effect of trade extended far beyond just the finished product. The impact of this global exchange on Viking domesticity is truly profound. It moves our perception of their homes even further away from the stark, utilitarian stereotype. It adds layers of sophistication, luxury, and artistic diversity that are often overlooked. The longhouse, far from being a mere shelter, becomes a vibrant, dynamic space, constantly evolving with the influx of new materials and ideas from across the known world. It was a place where local ingenuity met global inspiration, creating a unique blend of comfort and cosmopolitan flair. You can almost hear a Viking merchant, returning from a long voyage, proudly declaring, "Honey, I'm home." and I brought you the softest, shiniest curtain material you've ever seen. Now, if you could just figure out how to weave it, asterisk. So, the next time you envision a Viking longhouse, don't just see the sturdy timbers and the central hearth. Look closer. Imagine the flashes of vibrant color from imported dyes, the shimmer of foreign silk, the intricate patterns inspired by distant lands. These weren't just practical items. They were symbols of connection, markers of status, and above all, contributors to a surprising level of comfort and beauty within the Viking home. They are a testament to how deeply intertwined the world was, even 1,000 years ago, and how even the most seemingly brutal cultures sought out and cherished the soft, beautiful things in life. Section 14. You've seen how Vikings wove their world, literally, from the ground up, turning raw fibers into the very fabric of their lives. But imagine, for a moment, the quiet hum of a longhouse as the daylight begins to fade, and a woman, perhaps by the flickering glow of a fire, pulls out a piece of fabric. This isn't just any fabric. This is where the magic truly happens, where the functional becomes art, where the personal touch elevates the ordinary into something truly extraordinary. We're talking about embroidery, the dazzling, delicate, utterly captivating finishing touches that transformed a practical textile into a statement, a story, a whisper of individuality in a communal world. Think about it. After all the back-breaking work of preparing fibers, spinning yarn, and weaving cloth, you might think they'd be done. Just a simple blanket, a plain tunic, and call it a day, right? Oh, but no. That's like baking a delicious cake and then just serving it plain. No frosting, no sprinkles, no little decorative berries. Unthinkable. For the Vikings, embroidery was that frosting, that sprinkle, that perfectly placed berry. It was the art of adding intricate beauty and deeply personal flair, transforming a mere textile into a canvas for expression. You can almost feel the fine, smooth threads slipping through your fingers. While much of their everyday textiles were sturdy wool or linen, when it came to embroidery, Vikings weren't afraid to get fancy. They used finer wools, of course, spun to an almost silken thinness, but they also coveted and acquired silk. Yes, silk. Imagine the shimmer, the way it catches the light, brought all the way from distant lands along those very trade routes we discussed earlier. Sometimes, they even incorporated precious metal threads, glinting gold and silver, painstakingly wrapped around a core of linen or animal hair. It's like adding glitter to your art project, but instead of plastic, it's actual gold. Talk about an upgrade. The techniques they employed were surprisingly sophisticated. While we might not have a Viking embroidery instruction manual, wouldn't that be a fascinating find for a quiet afternoon? Archaeological discoveries have revealed a range of stitches that would be familiar to any modern embroiderer. You'd see variations of stem stitch, outlining designs with elegant precision, chain stitch creating a raised, ropey texture, and even couching where a thicker thread is laid on the surface and then stitched down with smaller, finer threads, perfect for those gleaming metallic accents. It's truly impressive to consider the dexterity and patience required, often working under less than ideal lighting conditions. No Netflix binges to pass the time while their fingers flew, just the quiet focus, perhaps the murmur of conversation, or the crackle of the fire. And what did they embroider? Practically anything that stood still long enough. Tunics and cloaks, especially around the necklines, cuffs, and hemlines, would burst with color and pattern. Imagine a chieftain's cloak, not just warm and practical, but edged with a border of intricate knotwork in shimmering silk, or a warrior's tunic with a stylized beast motif crawling up the sleeve. It wasn't just clothing, though. Wall hangings, those insulating storytellers we talked about, often featured embroidered details, making figures and symbols pop with vibrant life. Cushions and pillows, which already added a layer of comfort, were further elevated with decorative stitching, making even a simple seat feel like a throne. Even small pouches, belts, or the intricate borders of banners might have carried these detailed embellishments. The motifs themselves are a journey into the Viking mind. you'd encounter the famous gripping beasts, their serpentine bodies intertwined in dynamic, energetic patterns, claws and jaws locked in an eternal struggle. These aren't just pretty pictures. They're powerful symbols, perhaps representing strength, protection, or the chaotic beauty of the natural world. Then there's the elegant knotwork, an endless loop that seems to defy beginning or end, often interpreted as a symbol of eternity or interconnectedness. Geometric patterns, spirals, and even stylized human figures also appear, each telling a silent story. And sometimes you might even spot runic inscriptions woven into the design, perhaps a name, a blessing, or a short, enigmatic message. It's like a secret tattoo, but for your textiles. Mainstream historical fact alert the Oseberg ship burial, a truly astonishing find, yielded fragments of textiles that showcase the incredibly high level of Viking embroidery skill, particularly on silk, with detailed animal motifs that are still marveled at today. These aren't just scraps, they're masterpieces, preserved for over 1,000 years. The choice of motif, the colors used, the sheer density of the stitching, all of it spoke volumes about the owner. While the practical function of textiles was universal, the embroidery was where personal expression truly shone through. It was a way to display wealth, certainly, but also taste, status, and perhaps even one's personal beliefs or affiliations. A particularly elaborate piece might have taken hundreds of hours to complete, a testament to the artisan's skill and the patron's affluence. It's like commissioning a bespoke suit today, but with the added bonus that your tailor is also a world-class artist. This brings us back to the artisans themselves, predominantly Viking women. While men were off raiding and trading, women were the custodians of the hearth and home, and a huge part of that domestic sphere was the creation and embellishment of textiles. They were not just weavers, they were designers, dyers, embroiderers, and innovators. Their hands, though perhaps calloused from other tasks, were capable of incredible finesse and precision. The ability to create such detailed and beautiful work was a highly valued skill, passed down through generations. It was a source of pride, a mark of a well-run household, and a significant contribution to the family's standing. Imagine the quiet competition, the gentle one-upmanship, as neighbors compared the intricate borders on their cloaks. "Oh, that's a lovely new tunic, Gunhild. Is that a single knot in your endless knot pattern? Mine has at least 3. One might wonder, with all this effort, if some of the embroidery was purely for the wearer's delight. Quirky tidbit alert there's some speculation that certain intricate patterns, or even small, hidden embroidered symbols, might have been stitched onto the inside of garments, or in places not immediately visible to others. Perhaps a tiny protective rune, or a personal symbol of affection, known only to the wearer. It's like wearing fancy underwear that no one else sees, but it makes you feel good. A secret touch of luxury, a private whisper of beauty, just for yourself. After all, not every piece of art needs an audience of thousands. Sometimes the most meaningful art is deeply personal. And what about the purpose of these patterns? Open scholarly debate historians still argue whether certain complex embroidery patterns were purely decorative or held specific magical or protective properties. Were those gripping beasts simply cool-looking, or were they meant to ward off evil spirits? Did the endless knot symbolize eternity, or was it a charm for good luck? It's a fascinating question, blending art, belief, and the everyday. Perhaps it was a bit of both. A beautiful design that also offered a comforting sense of security in a sometimes harsh world. The preservation of these delicate textile fragments, often found in waterlogged burial sites like Oseberg, is nothing short of miraculous. They are fragile whispers from the past, allowing us to glimpse the vibrant, tactile world of Viking domestic life. Without these tangible pieces, we might never fully appreciate the extent to which embroidery transformed their homes and clothing from mere utilitarian items into expressions of artistry and identity. It shows us that even in a society often characterized by its ruggedness, there was a profound appreciation for beauty, for detail, for the careful, painstaking work that elevated the everyday into something truly special. So, the next time you picture a Viking, don't just imagine a rough-hewn warrior. Picture someone wearing a tunic with a meticulously embroidered neckline, perhaps a cloak with a border shimmering with silk and silver threads. Imagine them sitting on a bench covered with a cushion adorned with vibrant, hand-stitched patterns. These weren't just functional items. They were canvases, personal statements, and silent testaments to the skill, patience, and artistic sensibilities of the people who created them. These finishing touches weren't just adornments, they were integral to the very fabric of Viking life, adding layers of beauty, meaning, and surprising coziness to their homes. Section 15. Now, you might be thinking, this is all well and good, talking about cozy textiles and vibrant tapestries, but how do we know all this? Did someone just leave us a handy little instruction manual titled, Viking Interior Design for Dummies? Oh, if only! The truth, my friend, is far more precarious, more delicate, and frankly, a lot muddier. You see, the very things that made Viking homes so wonderfully warm and inviting, the wool, the linen, the animal hides, are, by their very nature, incredibly fragile. Imagine trying to keep your favorite wool sweater looking pristine for 1,000 years, especially without the benefit of a washing machine, or even a properly ventilated closet. It's a bit of a challenge, to say the least. Most organic materials, like textiles, simply vanish into the earth over time, consumed by hungry microbes, or just dissolving into dust. It's the ultimate laundry day, only the items never come back. So, how do we piece together this rich, tactile world of Viking domesticity? We rely on those rare, miraculous instances where conditions conspired to create a natural time capsule. Think of it like a cosmic lottery, where the winning ticket is a perfectly preserved fragment of ancient fabric. One of the most common, and perhaps most fascinating, preservation methods is the humble bog. Yes, the squishy, acidic, oxygen-deprived bog. It's like nature's very own pickling jar, perfectly designed to halt decay in its track. When textiles, or even entire bodies, are submerged in these anaerobic environments, the lack of oxygen and the high acidity prevent bacteria from doing their usual decomposition dance. It's not exactly a pleasant thought, perhaps, but for archaeologists, a bog find is like striking gold, or rather, striking remarkably well-preserved wool. You might pull out a piece of fabric that still retains some of its original color, albeit a little muted, and feel the surprisingly supple weave, as if it was made just yesterday. It's a bit like finding a perfectly preserved snack from 1,000 years ago, only you probably shouldn't try to eat it. But bogs aren't the only heroes of textile preservation. Far from it. Some of the most spectacular textile finds have come from burial mounds, particularly the grand ship burials. When a Viking chieftain or a powerful woman was laid to rest in a magnificent longship, carefully covered with earth and stone, a unique microclimate could be created. The combination of the ship's timbers, often sealed with tar or pitch, and the surrounding earth, could sometimes create pockets of air or conditions that slowed decay to a crawl. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Oseberg ship burial, discovered in Norway in 1904, contained an astonishing array of textiles, providing an unprecedented glimpse into the Viking textile world. This wasn't just a few scraps. We're talking about fragments of elaborate tapestries, remnants of bedding, clothing, cushions, and even small bags and pouches. It was like walking into a Viking department store, albeit one that had been very, very thoroughly burgled by time. Imagine the thrill of those archaeologists, carefully sifting through the earth, not just for gold or weapons, but for the faint imprints of fabric, or the whisper-thin threads of a 1,000-year-old blanket. It's painstaking work, requiring the patience of, well, someone who can spend months in a muddy ditch, meticulously brushing away dirt from what might look to the untrained eye like nothing more than a particularly stubborn clump of old string. And yet, from these humble origins, entire worlds are reconstructed. The Oseberg textiles, for instance, were a revelation. They showed us not only the types of materials used, primarily wool, but also linen and even some imported silk, but also the incredible sophistication of Viking weaving technique. We see fragments of fine twill weaves, sturdy tabby weaves, and even evidence of tablet weaving, which creates those beautiful, patterned bands often used for trim or belt. Beyond the grand burials, smaller fragments of textiles turn up in various archaeological contexts, especially in urban settlements and trading centers. Sites like Birka in Sweden, Hedeby in Denmark, now Germany, and Jorvik, modern-day York, in England, have yielded thousands of tiny textile fragments. These aren't usually spectacular whole pieces, but rather the detritus of daily life, worn-out clothing, discarded scraps from workshops, or even bits of fabric used to wrap other items. Think of it like finding a single sequin from a disco ball that exploded 1,000 years ago. It's small, but it tells you a lot about the party. These smaller finds are often preserved in damp, anaerobic layers, like ancient cesspits or waterlogged rubbish dump. While not as glamorous as a ship burial, they provide a crucial understanding of everyday textiles, the ones that were used, mended, worn out, and eventually discarded. They tell us about the common weaves, the typical dyes, and the sheer volume of fabric that must have been in circulation. One quirky or fringe tidbit is that some of the textile fragments found in archaeological digs are so small, you might literally mistake them for particularly fluffy dust bunnies. And yet, with the help of powerful microscopes and expert textile analysis, these tiny specks can reveal an astonishing amount of information: the type of fiber, the direction of the spin, the weave structure, even hints of the dyes used. It's like forensic science for fabric, where a single thread can tell a story of sheep, spinners, weavers, and the person who wore or used it. Sometimes, the only thing left of a once vibrant garment is the impression it left in a corroded metal brooch, the metal ions acting as a kind of ancient photographic fixer, preserving the ghost of the fabric. It's a testament to the meticulous work of archaeologists and textile conservators that they can coax such rich narratives from such seemingly insignificant remains. These preserved textiles, whether grand tapestries or humble scraps, allow us to confirm and expand upon our understanding of Viking textile production. We learn about the types of sheep breeds that produce the wool, the plants used for dyeing, madder for red, woad for blue, weld for yellow, and the complex patterns that were woven or embroidered. They show us that the Vikings were not just skilled warriors and navigators, but also master artisans, capable of producing textiles of remarkable beauty and durability. We see evidence of a vibrant palette, challenging the popular misconception of a drab, gray Viking world. Imagine pulling out a fragment of a blanket, still showing hints of a rich blue or a warm red, and suddenly, the longhouse in your mind's eye is no longer a dark, desolate place, but a space filled with color and life. Of course, interpreting these discoveries is not without its challenges. We rarely find a complete item, as mentioned. It's more like finding random pieces of a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, with no picture on the box and most of the pieces missing. Historians still debate the precise function and original appearance of many of the fragmented Oseberg tapestries. For instance, were they narrative scenes, mythological depictions, or perhaps simply decorative motifs? The lack of complete context often leaves room for scholarly discussion and, frankly, a lot of educated guesswork. Reconstructing a full garment or a large wall hanging from a handful of small, disconnected pieces requires immense skill, knowledge of historical textile techniques, and a healthy dose of creative imagination, all grounded in scientific analysis. It's a bit like trying to figure out what a full orchestra sounds like from a single, faint note played on a very old, slightly damp flute. Despite these challenges, the echoes from the earth speak volumes. These preserved textiles are tangible links to the past, allowing us to literally touch the world of the Vikings. They provide concrete evidence for the comfort, artistry, and domestic sophistication that we've been exploring. They show us the quality of the wool, the tightness of the weave, the intricacy of the embroidery, and the bold choices of color. They confirm that textiles were not merely functional items for warmth, but also powerful expressions of status, artistry, and cultural identity. From the humble wool thread to the grandest tapestry, each surviving fragment is a silent testament to the skill of Viking women, the wealth of their households, and the surprising coziness that defined their homes. It's a remarkable feat of preservation, allowing us to brush away the dust of a millennium and feel, however faintly, the soft, woven heartbeat of a Viking longhouse. Section 16. You've explored the cozy cocoon of the Viking longhouse, a place where textiles weren't just pretty additions, but fundamental building blocks of comfort and life. Now, let's pull back the curtain on the rest of early medieval Europe, and you'll start to see just how unique the Viking approach truly was. Imagine, for a moment, you're not sailing the chilly North Sea, but trudging through the muddy lanes of, say, Anglo-Saxon England, or perhaps the early Carolingian Empire. What kind of domestic bliss awaits you there, textile-wise? Well, for the vast majority of people, the common folk, the peasants, the villagers, the answer is not much. You step inside a typical European dwelling of the era, and the first thing you notice is often its stark simplicity. These homes, perhaps timber-framed with wattle and daub walls, or even simple stone and thatch structures, were built for function and survival, not necessarily for plush lounging. The floors? Often packed earth, just like in a longhouse, but without the benefit of those thick, insulating woven mats or luxurious animal hides we just discussed. You might find a few scattered rushes, perhaps offering a whisper of softness, but certainly not the deep, comforting pile of a well-trodden Viking floor. It's less hygge and more cold feet. Heating, too, presented a different challenge. While the Viking longhouse embraced its central hearth, allowing smoke to billow out through a roof vent or simply fill the upper reaches before dissipating, many European homes, particularly those of the more affluent, were starting to incorporate fireplaces. Now, a fireplace sounds lovely, doesn't it? A contained fire, a chimney drawing off the smoke, very civilized. But fireplaces, while effective at localized heating, often left the rest of the room feeling rather chilly. You'd gather around the hearth, perhaps, but venture too far into the corners and you'd find yourself shivering, a stark contrast to the more pervasive, if smoky, warmth radiating from a longhouse's central fire. It's the difference between a directed heat lamp and a giant, slightly inefficient space heater. And what about the walls? In many European homes, especially those of the less well-to-do, the walls were simply the structural material, exposed timber, rough plaster, or bare stone. Forget the vibrant, insulating tapestries that adorned Viking longhouses. Those were a luxury, if they existed at all, reserved for the very highest echelons of society. A humble European cottage wouldn't have them for insulation, nor for decoration. It was about practicality, about keeping the wind out, and often that was about it. You might find a simple crucifix or a religious icon, but certainly not a narrative tapestry depicting legendary sagas or intricate geometric patterns. It's like the difference between a minimalist studio apartment and a maximalist, fabric-draped bohemian den. Bedding, too, tells a story of contrast. While Vikings piled on layers of wool, animal furs, and even feathers for their communal sleeping platforms, a European peasant might sleep on a straw mattress, perhaps with a single rough woolen blanket, if they were lucky. The idea of a separate, private bedchamber, replete with fine linens and embroidered covers, was largely the domain of the nobility and the burgeoning merchant class. For the common person, warmth was achieved through huddling together, and comfort was a bonus, not a given. You wouldn't find yourself sinking into a cloud of Viking-esque coziness. Instead, you'd probably just be grateful not to freeze your toes off. It makes you wonder if, counting sheep, for them was less a lullaby and more a literal inventory of their only source of warmth. Now, let's be fair. The European elite, the kings, queens, dukes, and bishops, they certainly had their textiles. Oh, they had them in spades. Think of the famous Bayeux tapestry, for instance, a monumental embroidered cloth depicting the Norman conquest. This is a mainstream historical fact that highlights the incredible skill and artistic prowess in textiles during this era. But notice its function. It's a grand historical record, a display of power, hung in a cathedral or a great hall. It's not typically found insulating the sleeping quarters of the average lord, let alone the common folk. While beautiful, these grand European textiles were often more about public display and religious reverence than daily domestic comfort for the masses. They were statement pieces, not insulation. The very concept of home comfort was approached differently. For the Vikings, the longhouse was a multifunctional space, constantly adapting. Textiles allowed for this fluidity. They could be hung to create temporary partitions for privacy. Remember those ingenious textile dividers? Rolled up for communal feasts or layered for extra warmth. This adaptability was deeply ingrained in the Viking lifestyle, which often involved travel, trade, and even raiding. Their textiles were robust, portable, and served multiple purposes. They weren't just decorative, they were essential. In much of Europe, particularly as societies became more settled and hierarchical, the distinction between public and private spaces became more rigid. Castles had great halls for feasting and receiving guests, and separate, often sparsely furnished, private chambers. While these chambers might have had some textiles, like bed hangings or a simple rug, they rarely approached the comprehensive, all-encompassing textile coverage found in a longhouse. The very structure of the building often dictated the comfort, rather than relying on internal textile layering. One quirky or fringe tidbit: while Viking homes often featured animal hides from local fauna like bears, wolves, or reindeer for warmth and floor coverings, some European nobility, particularly those with connections to trade routes, might have imported exotic furs from far-off lands, like sable or ermine, for their cloaks and occasional furnishings. However, these were status symbols, worn rather than used to blanket their homes from floor to ceiling. It's like the difference between a practical, locally sourced sheepskin rug and a ridiculously expensive, purely ornamental leopard print throw you're afraid to even touch. Furthermore, the role of women in textile production differed subtly. While Viking women were universally the primary creators of domestic textiles, weaving the very fabric of their homes, in some parts of Europe, particularly in monastic settings or specialized urban workshops, textile production could be a more organized, even professionalized, male-dominated craft for certain high-end goods like tapestries or church vestments. This isn't to say European women didn't spin and weave for their families. They absolutely did, but the sheer scale and necessity of domestic textile production in the Viking world, making up for structural shortcomings of the longhouse, gave Viking women an unparalleled practical and economic power within their households. Historians still argue whether the widespread reliance on domestic textile production in Viking society granted women a higher social standing or autonomy compared to their counterparts in more feudal European societies. It's a fascinating chicken-and-egg question. Did the need for textiles elevate women, or did women's traditional role in textile production make them indispensable? The availability of materials also played a part. While wool was king across much of northern Europe, the Vikings' extensive trade networks, which we touched upon earlier, allowed them to access some surprising materials. Imagine silks from Byzantium or the Islamic world, not just for clothing but perhaps even for decorative elements within the home, adding a touch of exotic luxury to their otherwise hardy domestic textiles. While European elites also coveted and acquired these luxury goods, they were often displayed as personal garments or specific, highly prized items, rather than being integrated into the overall textile scheme of the home with the same ubiquity as wool. It's like the difference between buying a fancy new gadget to show off versus truly integrating smart home tech into every corner of your daily life. So, when you compare the two, you see a fundamental difference in philosophy. In much of early medieval Europe, especially for the common person, home comfort was a luxury, a bonus often achieved through sheer proximity to a fire or by huddling with family. Textiles were practical necessities, clothing, a basic blanket, or, for the rich, grand statements of power and piety. The home itself was often structurally cold and utilitarian. The Viking longhouse, by contrast, embraced its raw, elemental nature and then overlaid it with a rich, multi-layered textile skin. It was a conscious, deliberate choice to transform a structurally simple dwelling into a haven of warmth, privacy, and beauty through the ingenious use of fabric. The textiles weren't just afterthoughts, they were integral to the very design of the living space. They were the insulation, the room dividers, the art gallery, the bedding, and the floor coverings, all rolled into one cozy, woven package. They truly understood that sometimes the best way to fight the chill isn't with more stone, but with more wool. And perhaps a well-placed, slightly sarcastic joke about the draft. Section 17. You know, it's funny how our imaginations often paint a picture so different from reality, isn't it? For so long, when you pictured a Viking longhouse, your mind likely conjured up images of a dark, smoky, somewhat barren space, probably smelling faintly of wet dog and despair. A place designed purely for survival, where function aggressively elbowed out any notion of comfort or beauty. You might have envisioned rough-hewn timbers, a dirt floor, and the bare minimum needed to keep the elements at bay. Perhaps you even pictured a few hardy souls huddled around a central fire, shivering slightly despite the flames,